Okay, so we are going to continue writing stories about ourselves. This week, we are going to write a story about a time that you had fun with friends. So remember, we need to plan our story first. You guys have sheets that have this stuff on it. I didn't have one with me, so I wrote my own. But you're going to use your planning sheet, and it's going to be about a time that you had fun with friends. So the story I'm going to tell today is the time that I went for a walk with my neighbor. So the first thing I need to do is write down my characters. So the characters were Emily is her name, myself, Ada Joe, and our dogs. The setting was outside because that's where we went for a walk. And what were we doing? We were walking. Okay. Then I need to plan my middle. What happens to the characters? I need 3 things that happen to the characters. So the first thing that happened was I got Ada Joe and Bentley ready. The second thing that happens is we met Emily, and her dog's name is Maddie. Maddie. We met Emily and Maddie outside. And the third thing that happens is we started walking around the neighborhood. And then in the end, what happened last and how did the characters feel? So the last thing that happened was we walked around a second time, around the whole neighborhood a second time. And then how did we feel? We were hot and tired. So now I have planned my story. I have my beginning with my character setting and what I was doing. I have my middle, 3 different things that happened, and my end, the last thing that happened and how we felt. So now I'm ready to begin the beginning of my story. So I'm gonna get a blank piece of paper. And again, you can write a 1 up here if you want so you remember it's your beginning. And I'm gonna use my planning sheet, and I know that in my beginning, I need to write my characters, my setting, and what I was doing in the beginning, but I need to make sure they're complete sentences. So I'm going to write, it was one day when I was finished with school. So I'm gonna start my story with one day after school. But of course, I'm going to use pencil because that's what we do. One day after school. One day after school, I'll just write Ada Joe, Bentley, and I went for a walk with my neighbor and her dog. After school, Ada Joe, Bentley, and I went for a walk with our neighbor and her dog. So I need to make sure that I have said who my characters are, what the setting is, and what we were doing. Well, I said my characters. I said Ada, Joe, Bentley, and I with my neighbor and her dog. I said we went for a walk, so I've said what we're doing, and I said who the characters are, but I did not say what the setting was. So, went for a walk with our neighbor and her dog, and then I'm just gonna write around the neighborhood. Okay, so now I need to make sure that I have my characters, my setting, and what they were doing. So one day after school, Ada, Joe, Bentley, and I went for a walk with our neighbor and her dog around the neighborhood. So the neighborhood is my setting, so I have that. So I'm going to pull my success criteria. I have my setting, the characters, Ada, Joe, Bentley, and I with my neighbor and her dog. So I have my characters and what we're doing. Went for a walk, so I have that. So I know that I've included all three of those things in the beginning of my story. Now I need to go back through and I need to check my beginning of my story with my success criteria. So the first one on here is I use correct upper and lowercase letters. So I'm going to go through, I'm going to make sure that my sentences start with capitals. I'm going to make sure that any name is a capital letter, and I'm going to make sure that none of my letters are backwards or written incorrectly. So let's see, one day after school. One is uppercase because it's the beginning of my sentence. Ada, Joe is uppercase because it's a name. Bentley, is that a name? So it is. So I did a lowercase b. I need to change that to an uppercase because it's a name. Bentley and I went for a walk with our neighbor. This is supposed to be neighbor, so I need to make sure to change that so that all my letters are written correctly, not backwards, not written incorrectly on the lines. With our neighbor and her dog around the neighborhood. So now I have gone through and I have checked for correct upper and lowercase letters. So I can check this off. You might want to have your parents check over and make sure all of your letters are written correctly, that your B's and D's aren't mixed up, or that your G's and P's are written correctly. Anything, any of your letters. A lot of kids are still doing their A's backwards. Just anything you can to make sure that all of your letters are written correctly. Now I need to go through and make sure I use ending punctuation. Now, I was able to get my characters, my setting, and what I'm doing all in one sentence. So I need to make sure that I have punctuation at the end of my sentence. One day after school, Ada, Joe, Bentley, and I went for a walk with our neighbor and her dog around the neighborhood. What do you need at the end of every sentence? A period. And I kind of have one, but I'm going to make it a little bit more visible. So I do know that I used ending punctuation, so I can now check that off. Now I need to make sure that I use spaces between every word. One and a space between that. Day and after, school and Ada, Joe, Bentley and and I, went and for and a and walk, with an hour and neighbor, and her and dog and around, the and neighborhood. So I did put a space between every single word, so I can check that off. I spell popcorn words correctly. You guys should know your popcorn words, but if you don't, in the Google Slides presentation, there is a link on the popcorn words slide that has every single popcorn word that you need to know by the end of kindergarten. So you can use that list to check your popcorn words if you're not sure. Also in the Google Classroom under materials, there is a picture of the word wall as well that you could use if you needed to check your popcorn words. So I'm going to check them. 1 is spelled correctly, and is spelled correctly, I is spelled correctly, went is spelled correctly, for is spelled correctly, a is spelled correctly, with is spelled correctly, our is spelled correctly, and is spelled correctly, her is spelled correctly, and the is spelled correctly. Now I know how to spell them, so I know they're spelled correctly. If you don't know how to spell them, you should be checking, and also have your parents check. I can read my writing aloud. One day after school, Ada Jo, Bentley, and I went for a walk with our neighbor and her dog around the neighborhood. So I can read my writing aloud. And now I do know my story has a beginning because I had all 3 of these things, so I can check that one off. Now, I can leave the beginning part checked off, but I need to erase these because tomorrow I need to do my success criteria for my middle. But today we are done with the beginning of our story.